Hey now, welcome to America's leading Formula One podcast. This is the Dirty Side of the Track. I'm your host, Brian Saperstein, and with me, as always, is Rob Vale. What is happening, Rob, tonight?
Well, tonight we are in that strange limbo period where we're kind of between Christmas and New Year, and every single day just basically morphs into the same day. But having this to look forward to record has kind of kept me focused. But it's great. I can't believe we're on episode 3 already. It's going well. We're getting some good feedback. What I do need to bring up is that we've had a couple of people say, we always lead in with the US #1 podcast, which we are, according to your mom. But
she's never been wrong.
But it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you're always happy to listen into this podcast. What we're going to try and do really is kind of strike the balance between the new fan, which we kind of see that's probably going to come from this side of the pond. It's a sport that's really growing in interest over here, and we're going to try and ride that wave and get some interest going ahead of it all kicking off in Bahrain in 2022. But if you're a seasoned fan, no matter where you are in the world, you're more than welcome to come and join the Dirty Side of the Track. To that point, we've kind of been thinking about this, and what we're going to maybe look to spin up is maybe some YouTube shorts where we're going to do some videos of maybe 2-3 minutes, just to kind of allow people that maybe are new to maybe sponge up some of the, famous drivers of the past, famous races. What's it all about? What do different tires mean? What do the colors mean when Brian nerds off about yellow stripes? Because no one knows. I don't even know what he means half the time when he's talking about that. But that's going to be our kind of go-to strategy, I think. We'll try to keep the pod somewhere down the middle where newbies can enjoy what we're on about and experienced people can, and then look to maybe put some YouTube stuff out there to help guys bridge the gap.
That sounds brilliant. I have a friend, I'll call him G Money. He's been listening, and he asked me specifically about tire strategies and why they're different and how they work. And we will take care of answering that as we go. And my friends from the bowling league, from the LKI, they asked for a shout out, and they said the same thing. They're all relatively new to F1 in the last year or two, and they listen in and they have a lot of questions. And I know I have a lot of friends also, my Aussie buddy, Paul, who says, no, I know everything. I love hearing you guys talk about it. It's fantastic. So we want to cater to the casual fan, as Rob said so well. We're not going to get overly technical, even though I may be a nerd and listen to all of the team radio. You can always count on us to bring it back to earth. And the last thing I'd say, again, to level set, is one thing that's really important that came to me this week was when Nicholas Latifi came out with some of the criticism he's gotten since the end of the season and his move in Abu Dhabi. And I want to make a quick comment. For anybody who listens to Dirty Side, just know this pod and the people who listen to it and the group we're trying to build is really about the love of the best sport in the world. And so there's no place amongst our listeners for hate to any driver, and there's no booing of anybody you don't like. What it is just passionate appreciation for the drivers you do like. And so I would just say that we may critique and comment on driving and races and so forth, but just know that the Dirty Side is always about that love of the sport. So we are so excited to be doing this. I want to hit a couple highlights about social, Rob. A couple things that just really jumped out to me this week that were so amazing. So first of all, we're getting ready for 2022, and Mercedes had the first 2022 engine fire up this last week. And so what that means is the new car, and for them, it's the W13, is alive. And I saw it on Twitter, and it was so exciting to me to realize that 2022, while just a few calendar days away, and while the season may be a few months away, is here already, because the W13 is alive as the first team to fire up their 2022 car. So exciting. And what I want everybody to know is next week, we will talk, one of our topics, and we'll talk about what's coming next, but one of our topics will be about what the 2022 car means and what that'll mean for next season. So just super exciting to see Mercedes fired up. And one other Mercedes note, I'm not a Mercedes homer, even though I may drive an AMG. I would also say this, their Twitter account had the TikToker of the year, and Valtteri, it was the funniest minute of my week on social media, watching him and his TikToks throughout the year for many races. If you haven't seen Mercedes, either, I'm assuming it's on their TikTok, but on their Twitter for sure, watch Valtteri. It is just tremendously funny. Totally loved it. And my last social note, is on F1 as a whole. They put their Secret Santa out for 2021. They didn't have one in 2020. I don't know if it's COVID thing or not. It seems as though it's every other year because I've watched the 2019 and I've watched the 2017. I don't remember if there's a 2018. I couldn't find it, but it was fun to watch the drivers. A lot of drivers kind of take it seriously, where they want the gifts they give to be representative of where they're from. And some drivers think it's just a big gag where they give like just a white elephant type thing and they hope someone else passes it along the way. But everybody's into paddle. And so what is paddle? Am I outside the loop on this, Rob? I know what pickleball is. I just played it here in South Florida this week with visiting my in-laws. But what the hell is paddle? Is it a European? Do you know? I mean, like I want to play it.
I've got no clue. Once you start hitting a ball with anything but a tennis racket, I got no real clue what any of those sports are. But I got a quick question though on the you're very, very excited about the 2022 engine firing up from Mercedes. I really need to know, and I'm not sure all the listeners want to know, is did they fire up the 2022 driver radio yet? Do you know if that's going to sound any different?
I think Lando would describe my version of the radio.
It's broken. It's broken.
It's broken. It's not working at this point. So, I have not. I will say I don't know what to fill the time with without driver radio right now. It's leaving me empty, but I'm working on it. And, actually, as I referenced, I'm actually on vacation here in South Florida with my in-laws who are fantastic, but they don't have the drink.
You will not have the drink.
I don't have the drink. And it's
a real shame. It's been hurting me every day as I'm kind of sipping back a cold one, thinking that poor O'Brien is on vacation with his in-laws and not able to drink. I've been doubling down. I've been kind of making sure that I have one for me, and then I also have one for you as well. So I've been kind of keeping your end up there, Brian. It's all good.
Well, every morning, I think this is my father-in-law talking to me.
You will not have the drink.
So anyway, so Secret Santa was fantastic. I recommend everyone, if you have time, check it out on YouTube. It's about 12 minutes or so. The 2021 grid does their Secret Santa. So Rob, how about you, man? Christmas passed, New Year's coming. How are you doing?
Well, on that note, really, I mean, a couple of things, keeping the Santa theme going. Obviously, Santa bought you some more sound clips, which is always great that we can have those showcased. But Santa coming, watching my kids unwrap their presents, it kind of got me going down to Christmases of a bygone age. I said I'm not going to date myself, but I probably am now, given the first thing I'm going to talk about is that every time my kids open their presents, I'm kind of always have a flashback to when I was a kid. And I'm not going to try and make out that I was an F1 nerd, that all I ever wanted was F1 stuff at Christmas, because that's a complete lie. Most of it was always kind of footy related stuff. And by the way, I'm going to use footy because I think footy will keep me ingratiated to the UK folk that I'm not going to call football soccer, but then I'm not going to say football and confuse the American audience. I think footy is nicely down the middle that works on both sides of the pond.
Well, whatever you like. I will just say that on Twitter at F1 Dirty Side, there have been some comments that you've called it soccer, and that is inappropriate for people from your side of the pond. So just I've been defending your honor, and by defending, I mean not at all.
Yeah, I know. Look, little segue before I get back to my Santa thing, but when I first started coaching over here, and the girls that I was coaching, they all stood in front of me, and we'd done the warm up, and I said, "Okay, girls, everyone go and grab their footballs," and they all just looked at me in complete kind of like silence until one of them had the guts to kind of approach me and say, "Coach Rob, we're here for soccer training, not football training." So I basically had to go and grab a ball, pick it up, and say, "Right, this round thing, I am going to call it a football multiple times. I'm going to try and call it a soccer ball, so you know what I'm talking about." And I guess 5 years of living here has now finally kind of started bringing soccer into my vocabulary. But right now, I'm going to go footy, okay? So I'm going to go footy because I think that's kind of neutral. Anyway, there were moments in my youth when F1 kind of figured pretty highly. And one of them was probably mid-80s. I was big into Transformers. I'd had Optimus Prime for 1 year. That was a great present. I loved Optimus Prime. He was amazing. But I really wanted one of his original sort of Autobot buddies, which was a guy called Mirage. And Mirage was an F1 car. It was actually modeled after the Ligier team from the mid-80s. A beautiful looking blue and white Formula One car. I think it was sponsored by Elf, French oil company. Go look it up. Beautiful looking car. And it was just rare. It was one of those toys that just rare to get. And I never got it. never got it. I was always bitter. It went on my Christmas list every year, and I never got Mirage. And enough, I started Googling it this week to see if you could actually get it anymore. Hasbro lost the mold. They lost the mold, so Mirage will not be reissued. If you can pick him up on eBay, great, but he's probably been broken. Talking of Transformers that got broken, I think my brother probably knows this or at least suspected it. But Chris, Jazz, that Transformer, I think it was a police car that you got for Christmas one year. It wasn't the dog that broke it. It was me. I'm sorry. Anyway, moving on. The other thing that would always come around at Christmas time was I always wanted a Scalextrics. I think it's called electric cars or slot car racing over here, but Scalextrics, I used to love them. There was a lot of building of the track was the main thing, because once you actually built it, I gotta be honest, actually looking back now, Scalextrics weren't very good. You'd probably hold the front down and you'd hold the accelerator as fast as you could just so you could do a burnout, and then you'd let go of it, and then you'd watch the car just kind of bolt down the straight and flip off the corner, and you spent half your time recovering the car from various corners of your room to put it back on the track again, because you actually drive them round so they wouldn't crash. You had to drive them around slowly.
In my house, I had it set up for reasons I don't understand on the shaggiest shag pile carpet you could ever find. And so when the car would go flying off, it was like a good 3-4 minutes of rubbing it on your chest to get all that, like, on your t-shirt, to get all that carpet off the bottom of the car, because it wouldn't work otherwise. That little conductor point that had to go into the slot never worked when it's covered in carpet. And I didn't. So I rubbed it across my t-shirt over and over to get that crap off so that the car would go around. Loved it. I actually fairly recently, when my oldest daughter was getting into science and she loved it, I wanted to teach her kind of some of the idea of physics early. So I bought another set of these tracks and we set it up in the basement. And my wife said, "What's the point of this?" And I said, "Well, I want to show her if you're going too fast for the corner, what happens, but how the change in inertia works so that you can actually do this." And she said, "Or did you just want to buy another track and build it yourself?" I said, "Well, whatever, potato." And so we may have in my basement today, it's in a big Tupperware type box at this point, but fairly recently bought another version of that track just so that I could play around with it. So yeah, I hear you. That was a great toy.
I don't know if you got it over here as well, but I think probably acknowledging the fact that these cars just flipped out at every moment. And if it was anything like my house, if the car flipped out and my dog was nearby, that was something for it to go chase and go eat. I think my brother will probably correct me, but I think we had the Nigel Mansell Williams era set. And I'm sure that got its rear spoiler chewed off by our dog as it kind of thought it was something to fetch as it flipped off the track. But anyway, they kind of, a few years later, they brought out this thing called Magnatrax, which was basically just a magnet that was glued to the bottom of the rear of the car so that it would kind of pull it down onto the track. And in theory, you could race them faster. All I felt was that just kind of slowed the car down a little bit because the magnet was sticking it. So you make it go faster anyway, and then it would end up flipping out and crashing off anyway. So...
So you don't like the car with too much aero, is what you're saying. You just want it to go fast, cut through and move on.
Yeah, there was always something about that smell of those cars as well.
When the track got hot?
When the track got hot, or if you had been doing the burnout thing where you held the front down and just held the accelerator down for a while, that electric burning smell is different to actual electric burning smell, because like sometimes my wife will say, "Hey, I think something might be burning." I'm like, "No, that's not burning. That's actually more of a Scalextric smell," which I know what that means. But yeah, anyway, that's awesome. The other thing the other things are my boys are getting older now, so it's kind of not so much the physical toys now. They're into their video game in big style, so it's kind of those types of things. And that got me going down a hell of a rabbit hole this week, where I started going through YouTube videos of all the different F1 games that I remember playing over the years. There was a game. I didn't have a home PC. The kind of home computer that I had was called a Spectrum. I don't think the ZX Spectrum made it in the US, but it's basically 8-bit computer that really, you loaded the games in by loading a tape. You played a tape, and as the tape kind of loaded it in, then this game would appear. And there's a game called Checkered Flag, which I remember being awesome. And I found a YouTube video of it, and oh my God, I was easily pleased as a kid. I mean, it was essentially just black and green, sliding background, a car that kind of looked like a car, and terrible sound effects. But do you know what? I enjoy playing Checkered Flag. It was a good game. But
my first one was Pole Position, and I had an Atari 2600. I had pole position. It was brilliant. It was an open wheel racer. I'd like to think it was Formula One. And I once went to an arcade with a buddy, and they had a pole position console to play. And I ended up beating the game. I finished, and there were at least 3 or 4 other, 6-year-olds there, and they were mesmerized. I was the king of the world, or at least the king of northeastern Wisconsin, or at least the king of Johnson's Park in Sister Bay, Wisconsin. But no one had ever seen anyone beat something like that, and I was definitely the proudest guy around. And I loved, from then on, I was totally addicted to car games, racing games, and Formula One in particular. My first real at-home appreciation was Nintendo. And while Punch-Out, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, 007-373-5963 for the nerds, while Punch-Out was my favorite game, Rad Racer was one of my favorites. They had a 328, the Ferrari 328, or the generic F1 car, as it was called on the game, and I went and booted it up to check, the F1 machine. All right, then. I was usually the 328, but I was occasionally the F1 machine. And it just, racing as a whole, Excite Bike on Nintendo took so many of my hours building tracks. You talked about building tracks and setting up Scalextrics and other things. For me, on video games, setting up the Excite Bike tracks and racing motorcycles across them was amazing. And I just loved it. So I hear you. While I didn't know Checkered Flag, I love those games.
Miss anything.
Yeah, all right.
I mean, the big jump I had then as I went through the various different kind of consoles. I had a Sega Mega Drive at one point. I remember, I think it was Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco Grand Prix, or maybe Ayrton Senna got involved on Super Monaco Grand Prix 2. Doesn't really matter. They're both essentially the same game, but it was such an uplift in kind of graphics and sound, and it was such a good game. I lost many an hour playing on that one because it just felt a little bit more real. It was less of that kind of the background that just scrolled from left to right just to make an impression that you were somewhere. And I loved that one. But and then this one probably isn't really me as being a kid as much, because actually I blew a lot of my student loan on PlayStation 1 on launch day. And I had 2 games. I had FIFA 94 and the F1 game. And both of those games did 2 things that blew my mind, because I'd grown up with these various different consoles and computers, and what none of them had ever had, that both of those 2 games had, was commentary, which sounds ridiculous now. If I tried to tell my kids that, there used to be games where you had to imagine there was a commentary team in your own head, but, the Formula One had Murray Walker, God bless his soul, and okay, there were a limited number of phrases that had been recorded. So once you'd played the game for a few times, you pretty much heard them all. But it was awesome that they were commentating on what I was doing. It was amazing.
Well, what blows my mind, as you say, the limited number of commentary sort of schemes. The first one that hit me like that was Madden. And I don't remember the year, let's say Madden 94. And what was amazing was I wasn't good at playing Madden, and I'd always play the same defense, and I'd play a nickelback, 5th defensive back in my defensive backfield, and Pat Summerall would come on every time, nickelback in this time, and my friends would start laughing because I called the same darn defense every time, and every time Pat Summerall would say the same thing before it started. So limited commentary, but it was awesome. And I agree with you on the games. Before we get modern, I had one more game I would want to highlight from that era, and it was on Super Nintendo. And I've thought a lot about this. So I did not have a Super Nintendo, and I don't like to impose, but I would invite myself over to people's houses left and right who had Super Nintendos. Like, you got Super Nintendo? What you doing today? I'll bring some pretzels. And so there was a particular game, F-Zero. I loved F-Zero more than anything. I have it on an emulator now, and I've played it far more than I should as a grown-ass man on an emulator. But let me say this. I never really thought about it till literally right now. If F2, Formula 2, feeds into Formula 1, does Formula 1 feed into Formula 0, F-Zero? Is that what F-Zero is? The greatest racing spectacle in the world? I think it is. I think Super Nintendo was way ahead of stuff in the mid-90s. Great game, great game. But I know we want to go modern a little real fast before we kind of hit the future. And one thing I'd say really fast before I turn it back to you is for F1 2019 and 2020, I actually bought an Xbox One for Forza Horizon 3. And while I had Forza, I also had F1 2019, then had F1 2020. I loved F1 2020. I love the old cars, the old tracks, the challenges that they had. And they don't have that in 2021. And I might even have a new Xbox Series X for a variety of reasons that we don't have to go into tonight. But I have 2021, F1 2021 on that. It's a great game. It's amazing, fantastic game. But they don't have those old cars and those old tracks and challenges. And I miss that. That was so great in 2020. I'm actually download that again when I get home, when I can have the drink. So what else do you have about video games before we hit
that was it really. I mean, because just to finish on that was one of the things I found a YouTube video which was Formula One games through the ages, and I think it started with, I can't even remember, it might have been called like Pit Stop or whatever. It was 1979 was the first game that they had on this video. And if you just quickly kind of scroll the progress bar through and you look at what the game looked like in 1979 and you bring it forward now to, as you're just talking about, F1 2021. Oh my God. If I had a time machine, I could take a current like Xbox, PlayStation or what, and go back to my kind of like 10-year-old self and go, here you go, play this. I think I would literally watch my own younger self's head just explode, maybe implode, whichever is the most severe, because it's crazy. And what that kind of leads us into nicely to kind of start talking about kind of getting back to the real world rather than just video games is like, I was looking this week about, they were starting to talk about a lot of the drivers have been driving the 2022 cars, not in reality, because like you say, only Mercedes have fired theirs up, but they've all been in the simulators. Because even if we think like F1 2021 is an amazing game and the graphics and all this kind of stuff, I mean, what these guys must have, I don't even know what it looks like, but it's got to be even like next level from that. And it's quite funny because none of them have wanted to be able to give anything away because A, they're not allowed to because of the competition between the teams. But it's almost been that, I'll show you mine if you show me yours, because there's been like these things where they've gone, yeah, the new cars, they kind of feel a bit funny, don't they? They're not like the existing ones. Hey, how are you getting on with yours, Brian? What's your new car feeling like?
Amazing.
No one's really wanting to answer because they're all kind of like, yeah, it's different. Oh, how's it different? Well, I can't say because we're in competition, but it is kind of setting the scene for next year that I think the cars, and like you say, we're going to talk about this in a future episode, but I think they're radically different and they're feeling different. And these guys, the simulators are so good these days that I think if we're getting that feedback right now that in the simulators they're feeling different, I think they're legitimately going to be a different beast than what these guys have been driving around in the last couple of years.
You know, I'm so excited to see what 2022 holds. And like you say, I mean, the cars are different. They're literally made differently so that the racing can be better, tighter, closer, more open to other teams winning, being on the podium. At least that's what we've been promised. And you and I consume a lot of the same content from F1 and others. So we are very excited about 2022. And with that, you know, we thought today, as we kind of led off with, let's talk a little bit of what the 2022 lineup looks like. And I know we're flipping this around a little, but Rob, maybe I'll start here and talk a little bit about the way we see 2022 going. So we're going to start from the back of the grid. What we'll do is effectively imagine you're watching the first race of next year and they start the intro. What they will do is by reverse order of constructor finish, show the teams. And so we'll do the same today. And we're going to start off with Haas, who had a grand total of no points in 2021. They're two drivers for next year, Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. A couple of notes I'd give, Rob, as we look at this. And again, next week, in addition to talking about the new regs and having a special guest, so stay tuned. We'll talk a little about who that is later. But we'll also talk about some predictions for next year. And one of the things I would say now, not a prediction, just a note, is the way that F1 drivers and ESPN rated their driver lineups. And ESPN had Mick Schumacher as their 10th best driver, yet you somehow had him in your bottom three. I'm not saying you're wrong from last week, but boy, were you wrong. And so they got Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. Here's my note for Haas. They gave all of their development time and money in 2021 to 2022. So they literally threw away a year to be ready for next year. So I pray as an American, I hope that my Haas team from America is ready to kick some butt next year. It's not super promising because this year the most blue flags, here's a stat for you. Here's a nerd stat. The most blue flags in 2021, and a blue flag for everybody new, is when a car on the lap ahead of you is coming up behind you. You have to get out of the way so they can pass you. The most in 2021, 234 to Nikita Mazepin at Haas. Second most was Mick, 166. Third most was Nicky Latifi, 100. And the fourth most was George Russell, 69. So Haas, Williams. So let's hope for their sake that next year is better. And Haas-wise, I sure hope so.
So I'm going to jump in here and defend myself because I'm not wrong. I was completely right for the very reasons that you just threw in there, which is that Haas basically threw Schumacher and Mazepin under the bus this year. They basically said, we don't have enough budget to even try to compete this year, so we're going to throw everything into the brand new cars that are coming next year. So there was no other way than those two were going to be at the bottom with no points, which therefore means they have to be in the bottom drivers on my list. Not because they're bad drivers, just because you can only play with the hand that you're dealt, and they were dealt a bad hand. So yeah, we'll talk more about the cars and everything future episode, but I just hope 2022 gives these two young guys. I was trying to kind of keep up with I've come up with a name now. I was going to say Brian's Nerding, but actually I'm going to go with Sap Stats.
Sap Stats.
We maybe should have a little segment of Sap Stats on future shows. Anyway, to not be outdone by Sap Stats, I was looking at the ages of the drivers, and both Mick Schumacher and Mazepin are both 22. So, I mean, two young drivers, not really been in Formula One that long. They obviously see something in them that means they're going to keep them around in the 2022 car. If they really thought these guys couldn't handle the new car, I mean, maybe, of course it's budget and it's which drivers are available, but they didn't seem to really get involved in the whole merry-go-round that happens when all the drivers are up for kind of consideration. And like I say, we don't know what happens behind closed doors. Maybe they did try to get rid of both of them, but I'd like to think they didn't. I'd love to think that Mick Schumacher can do something to kind of rekindle the legacy of his dad, right? That's my kind of rose-tinted emotional thing, is that when Michael broke through in that Benetton that really shouldn't have been good enough to win the races that he won, I'd love to see that if Haas could just give him a car that's a little bit better than the kind of steaming turd that it was this year, that we can get some points on the board. And that would be amazing. I'm not saying win races, just let's see Mick Schumacher just a little bit higher up the, points. Points would be awesome. Yeah.
Points, just some points. I agreed. And Gene Haas or team, if you're listening, call us up. We're always happy to consult from the U.S. perspective. Totally agree with everything you said. I'm going to move us along because I want to steal a sound. So Alfa Romeo next, as you're going through the Formula One introductions, and a new driver and an amazing driver moving to a new team. So we have Valtteri Bottas moving from Mercedes to Alfa. He is, I think, if the Alfa Romeo is more competitive, he's going to be just utterly amazing. And I'm assuming before every race, he will
have some porridge.
And so if he has his porridge, he is a tremendous driver. And I know we talked a little bit about being the second banana to Lewis and how hard that can be, but he is just tremendous. And I really look forward to seeing what he can do in that car, especially if it's not also a flaming, whatever Rob called dog turd, as it was a lot this last year. And then the second driver, a new driver to Formula One, but who's done amazing in Formula Two, Guanyu Zhou from China. And my first introduction to Guanyu Zhou was from the streaming esports during the beginning of lockdown, and watching the current F1 drivers and some other drivers participate. He kicked a lot of butt, and I recognize, behind a steering wheel and a computer motherboard doesn't always translate to the racetrack, but he had success in Formula 2. So I'm actually really excited for Alfa Romeo. If you asked me, and I'm going to steal one prediction from next week, what team may actually really change places on the grid in the Constructor Championship, I think Alfa Romeo may bump up, because I think the rookie shows a lot of promise, and Valtteri is amazing. I think that's a great steal for them. As long as I said before, every race
I had some porridge.
So we'll see. So Rob, what do you think about Alfa Romeo?
Other than the fact that it's obviously yet another sound effect you got for Christmas. Yeah, no, I agree. This is kind of a team with an elder statesman and the rookie, like you say. We've got Valtteri in at 32, and how do you pronounce his name again?
Guanyu Zhou.
Yep, at 22. I just would like to see that, Valtteri, when he was at Williams, and I loved him at Williams. And there was two reasons. A, I loved his driving style. B, I'm an absolute sucker for the Martini livery on the Williams. It was just a gorgeous looking car with Valtteri lighting it up, and it was just awesome. And for whatever reason, I've been reading a number of articles on it kind of this week, whether he ever got the best out of the Mercedes, whether Mercedes were ever set up to get the best out of him, whether he was just needed to be a solid second driver, whatever. I don't ever think we kind of saw the same Valtteri that was kind of at Williams. And I just hope this is kind of a second win for him here, that not being the number 2 driver behind someone like Lewis, which must have ridiculous pressure and expectations that kind of come along with it. I think if that Alpha can be competitive, in the same way that we hope that Haas is going to be. But if it can kind of get a little bit higher up the field, then I think Valtteri could really do something this year and remind us all the amazing driver that we know he is, right? And I think he could really do something. I just hope there's always you've seen Top Gear and the Grand Tour, right, with Clarkson and the bunch. They would always comment that Alfa Romeo is the most gorgeous looking car when you see it parked at the side of the road because it breaks down all the time. So, we shall see.
I hope so too. I love their Alfa Romeo takes. Agree. I've never had an Alfa, so I don't know if that means I'm not a real true petrol head. I'm actually reading currently on That Bombshell by Richard Porter, the script editor from Top Gear. So I'm reading that book now. I'm about 2/3 the way through. And my favorite thing from Top Gear was, just a quick note, was on Lotus. And I know you talked about cars earlier and things you'd gotten as a kid. I actually got a Lotus John Player special, that black livery.
Gold.
Yeah, black and gold. I think I showed it to you once. I have it. I even have the Lotus 77 that tows it. I have the whole thing from when I was a kid. But they always said Lotus meant lots of trouble, usually serious. And so that always made me laugh. But anyway, sorry. So you hit Alpha. Why don't you bring us through Williams and move us on?
Okay, so Williams, we've got kind of, if Haas have got the 2 rookies and Alfa have got the elder statesman and the rookie, then from Formula One kind of ages, Williams have got kind of 2 middle of the road guys. We've got Latifi, who's 26, and Albon, who's 25. Albon, it's just nice to see him back. He's had a strange, I had to remind myself, I was kind of going online and looking at his history, because he was Toro Rosso, the sister team of Red Bull. He made it to Red Bull, I think it was unusual circumstances where they basically they swapped them. They swapped Albon and Gasly midway through a season. I think it was from a Belgium Grand Prix, where they basically went, Gasly, not doing it. You're demoted. Up you come, Albon. And he did really well. I've got this thing here that he ended up finishing in the final season. He ended up finishing 7th in the championship. He got 105 points, which really wasn't that kind of disastrous. But then they dropped him. And he's been out in the wilderness for a year, and now he's back. So I kind of think that, again, soft spot for Williams. Always liked the Williams car. I think if they can give him a car, he's got a point to prove. He should be really coming back and taking the kind of the bit between the teeth here. Latifi, I'm not sure. Again, he's had flashes where he kind of can show what he can do. He feels like one of those drivers. We'll come to this later. I've got some stats later just to kind of trump the SAP stats. But there's some drivers that are just getting lucky where their retirements are through failures, engine failures, brake failures, whatever it is. So it's not their fault. There's other drivers whose retirements are due to them spinning or them crashing or them doing something stupid. And he just seems to fall into that latter category a little bit too much. So, but if he matures as a driver, but he is the elder one, he's 26. He isn't the kind of the 21, 22-year-old who can be forgiven for all these mistakes. So I'm not sure Latifi is right for Williams next year. But if Albon comes back and kind of takes the number one slot, grabs some points, and Latifi can back him up, then maybe he's a good slot. What do you think?
So I'm a big fan of the fact that Formula One drivers are showing more personality. So I love looking at what they share with us. Obviously, it's not everything, not their whole life, but Albon is one of the Twitch quartet. And for people who don't know, Twitch is a place where you can stream video games and the games you play. And Albon, when I say quartet, it's Alex Albon, Lando Norris, George Russell, and Charles Leclerc. And those four guys seem to be friends off the track. And during the beginning of COVID in 2020, as the races were postponed, starting in Australia, and everyone's trying to figure out what to do about COVID, these four guys went on Twitch all the time, streaming different racing games. And I watched a lot of it in the evenings because I missed my racing. And I didn't have team radio to listen to. And there were no SAP stats to check out. And so Albon, I really got to know his story a bit, his family, the way he, just a lot of things about him that I learned from reading and understanding. And I'm so happy he's back. And you kind of bagged on Latifi a little. I get it, right? There are really, in my mind, and I'm probably wrong, but in my mind, there are three main paid drivers. And let me explain what that means for people. It's drivers who bring sponsorships, who bring big boosters and donors, who support the team from a marketing and sponsorship perspective. So it sort of pays not only for their salary, but also the team to remain afloat. And Latifi is one of those three paid drivers. And the other two, there are more, but the three big ones are, in my mind, are Latifi, now Guang Yu Zhou, and Nikita Mazepin. And Mick actually brings money too, but sort of differently. So I would say, I'd like to see Nicky have a great season.
Yeah.
I felt he was better the second half of last year. And I felt he was, I watched a lot of, again, social stuff, watched George and Nicky on vacations and hanging out, felt like he found a groove, and he out-qualified George a couple times at the end of the year. So I'm bullish, optimistically bullish on Williams because I want to be, but I'm not as bullish as I am on Alfa Romeo. I feel like Alfa Romeo is going to jump him, and I just hope Williams kind of keep pace.
We're talking about kind of the money that people kind of bring in, kind of brings us on to next on the grid, which is Aston Martin, right? Now here we've definitely got rookie versus elder statesman because we've got good old Sebastian Vettel.
I wouldn't call Stroll a rookie, but youngster versus elder statesman.
Okay. I guess, sorry. The Americans use the word rookie a little bit more. We just talk anybody that's young as a rookie, right? So he's 21. He's a kid. Anyway, you got Sebastian Vettel, 34. Not quite sure how that's happened. How the hell is Sebastian Vettel 34? Anyway, but you got Lance Stroll, 21 years old. Yeah, 21.
No, he's got to be more older than that. He was at Williams.
No, 23. Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. 23. All right. Everyone kind of beats up on him. Oh, his dad's a billionaire. He's only driving in the team because his dad made a huge donation and got him into the sport to start with. Okay, fine. Maybe he does. Money opens doors. But I was looking at his stats today. He's had 100, I think it's 101 starts in F1. Never really been at a top competing team, but he's got 3 podiums. He got pole in Canada. He's got the most did not finish classifications due to failures rather than driver error out of any of kind of the youngsters that kind of his same kind of age, right? So the guy doesn't suck. He's put a car on pole that probably shouldn't have been on pole. He's hit podium finishes. He gets points. I think this guy gets a bit of a bad rap for being Rich Daddy's driver. I'm thinking, no, he's not. He's not an idiot behind the wheel, right?
No, he's definitely a good driver. You're right. He's definitely a very talented driver. Yeah. But aren't we all envious of billionaires? I mean, like, come on now. I mean, if you had $1 billion, I'd be ripping on you left and right on this podcast. I do that already.
I think that's what makes him the easy target, right? Is that, it's just easy to say, he's only in the sport because his dad is rich. And I just think every time that's just cheap. It's a cheap shot. He's a good driver. I think he's got a good mentor in the team in Vettel. I think Aston Martin are going forward. But again, it's the big unknown as to how have they translated where we are. I mean, it is the same for every one of the teams, right? We're looking at the big unknown of what will the 2022 car look like?
Yeah, but they were the
So
biggest droppers, right? They were the biggest, Tracing Point, Pink Mercedes, whatever you want to call the Racing Point team that became Aston Martin. They were the biggest droppers in the constructors. They went from, trying to compete with Ferrari and McLaren, and now they're trying to just barely edge out, and they handsomely did, but edge out Williams. And so to me, I agree with everything you said. I would just say that, I want to see what Seb has left in the tank. You mentioned he's a little older. I went back and kind of, we talked a little bit last week about the way I've grown a soft spot for Seb and the way he, checked on Lando and his social causes. But my favorite Seb moment that I've seen, I just want to highlight it really quick because this could be something he uses for Nikita. He used it for Danny Kvyat a couple years ago. The Russian driver was coming through and kept running into Seb twice, ran into him. And Seb had a name for him.
I came like a torpedo.
You came like a torpedo, came flying through and so they called Kvyat the torpedo. The other racing drivers did until he left F1. So I'm just hoping Seb can nickname somebody, either the torpedo 2 or something else. But I am honestly, Rob, the team that I'm most curious to see where they go is Aston Martin, because they had higher aspirations than finishing behind Alpine and AlphaTauri. And so that actually brings us to AlphaTauri, who's next: Pierre Gasly, Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki's second year, and Pierre, who everybody seemed to think did pretty well. It'll be curious too. One thing I'd ask as we kind of get into AlphaTauri is, as I hope everybody knows, they have a Honda powertrain, and next year it's a joint deal where Honda was planning to leave F1, but it'll be a joint powertrain work in 2022. However, beyond that, it's sort of the Red Bull powertrain 2023 plus, because they're the sister team of Red Bull. So I'm just really curious, because to me, Pierre Gasly was one of the drivers, as we talked about last week, the top 3 non-Max and Lewis drivers. He was tremendous. Yuki was developing, finished 4th in the last race. What is the runway for AlphaTauri? Feels like they have one really good driver and one up and coming driver. Will this translate to 2022 and beyond? What are some of your thoughts on AlphaTauri?
we can't keep saying that we think that each team, as they get the 2022 car, is going to go up, right? Someone's going to have to go down to be replaced by these teams that are coming up. So I do worry about AlphaTauri. Gasly is talented. I think he will get the points maybe to keep them in that kind of midfield area. Tsunoda was funny because he kind of blew hot and cold. And I think my favorite quote from him was that when they were asking about kind of the 2022 drives and he was being retained, and he actually said he was surprised they requested him to stay.
I love Yuki. He's got such a great personality.
I was going to say, fair play to the kid for being honest, right? I mean, he had moments where you just thought, what the hell is this guy doing in the car? And then he would have moments where he was absolutely amazing. And maybe that is just the kind of naivety of youth. And we'll see a more mature drive from him next year after he's got the kind of the first year under his belt. What's your thoughts on sister teams? Because big changes coming next year in the 2022 cars. Can a team both develop its own car for 2022 and help support the sister team do the same? Can they risk sharing I don't really know how the sister team stuff works. Maybe it's a question for our guest that you've hinted at for next week to ask about these things. But I don't know, when it's such a big change, do you think they can hang on the coattails of Red Bull?
I don't see why not, right? I mean, as long as you can get a solid engine and an aero package, at least roughly, that works. And I don't know what you're allowed to share, right? I mean, you read about copying brakes and things, this, that, and the other. I'd love to know, but to me, yeah, why not? I mean, if someone can help fund your homework, then you take it and you move on from there. And Gasly's a great driver, and Tsunoda's growing, and I'm excited. I know we have talked a lot about teams going up. I actually have one that I think is going down, is Alpine, formerly known as Renault, for those of you who are new, and those are French cars. Alpine actually is a French model owned by Renault. Was it the A110? It's a cool looking little car that they have that's well known. But so Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon. Esteban had also, you talk about hot and cold, man, he had signed that new deal and then was bad, and then boom, Hungary came right before the break. Yep. and he was just, it was fun to watch. And I felt like in Brazil he was on the podium for the whole race except the last 10 meters. And Fernando made his car wide, came back to the sport after a brief hiatus, a great champion. I actually think we may have seen the best of Alpine this year. And I feel regardless of car change, I'm a little concerned that we may see Alpine drop 1 or 2 spots in the constructors. I could see even Alfa Romeo having a sight on their back. So maybe even the third. I may be wrong, but to me, we joke about all these cars moving up. I actually have 2 that are for sure, I think, going down. One's Alpine.
No, I agree. I love Fernando Alonso, but he's now weighing in, I think, the oldest guy on the grid. He's 40 years old, right? So, I mean, he's actually kind of almost in my age bracket. So, and he's still driving. And fair play to him for triggering his extension. He probably deserved it. We were talking about whether Lewis would really retire because you can't take the competitor out of the DNA of these guys, and you probably can't take that out of Alonso either. But I just kind of worry that there's an old saying about you can't teach old dogs new tricks, right? So this is going to be a radically different car, different regs. I don't know. I don't know whether he's going to get the best out of the new situation. Ocon doesn't sort of hit me as the bright new thing that can flourish under Alonso's wing, and they're going to catapult themselves up there. So I'm with you. If I have to pick someone though I think is kind of toppling down to make up for all the ones that we say are going to go up, then yeah, it has to be them, right?
I would agree, and I have one more, but I will get to them in a second. The one that I think actually may pop a spot upwards is McLaren. They were 4th behind Ferrari. Lando and Daniel Ricciardo. And as I already said, Lando hopes the 2022 car is not.
It's broken. It's broken.
He hopes it's not broken. And so I feel like, Lando was one of those drivers who I just don't think he's hit his cap yet. He was better in his 3rd year. He'll be even better in his 4th. Ricciardo made a point when he won in Italy, when he came around at Monza and took victory. He said, it's been a hard year. And it took him time to get used to the new car, unlike Carlos Sainz at Ferrari. But Ricciardo, yes, he had a lot of qualifyings where he was 13th. Felt like unlucky 13 was his lucky number for so many qualifyings. And I think he's better than that. And he will find his groove. And Lando will continue to grow. And I like the mojo of the team. I know this sounds silly, but it feels like Zach Brown and what they've built. And, I watched, I may have mentioned this last week. I can't remember. I was talking to someone about it. Pato O'Ward from IndyCar came over. He's on the Arrows team, and IndyCar came over, sister team of McLaren, and drove the F1 car, and was, after one session, came out and said, my neck, the G's that this car pulls is unbelievable.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that, they're all in. It feels like a family. I've watched their ridiculous Christmas tree videos.
Well, they're obviously going to win then.
Obviously. So for me, I think McLaren jumps Ferrari next year.
So let me just rip up the rule book here and not take it in order anymore. McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull. Those are our next 3 kind of in order, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say my view is that Mercedes are just going to make the new car work. I don't see any reason why Mercedes are just going to magically fall behind, that they can't work out how to make a new car work. So I'm just going to go out there and say that we'll touch on the 2 drivers in a minute, but I'm just going to say that if we just assume that Mercedes stay out front, right? I actually think that McLaren and Ferrari are going to take more steps forward than maybe Red Bull are. And actually the brand new cars and the brand new kind of almost clean slate of this could be of a detriment to Red Bull, because I don't think they'll be the single team chasing Mercedes anymore. And we might see more sharing of those podiums, wins, that where it was always, well, if Mercedes don't win it, we know it's Red Bull. I think McLaren, I'm with you. I think McLaren have got a mojo going on that if they can keep that momentum going into the 2022 car, I think we can see McLaren dancing around the top end of the field again. I think Ferrari, again, is kind of the emotional. I love Ferraris. I love the prancing horse. I want to see those guys go forward again. They've kept the same driver lineup. They've kept the trust in Leclerc and Sainz. I think those guys can be pushing at that top end as well. And I think Red Bull will as well. Well, you can't have everybody on the podium. So I just wonder if McLaren and Ferrari up their game and get closer to Red Bull, do those two being closer to Red Bull take more points off Red Bull over the course of a season, actually lead to this being an easier season for Mercedes next year? There it is. I've done it. I've said it. What do you think?
I think you're crazy. I think you're wrong. I think it's incorrect. But I like your assumption that they take the points off Red Bull. They battle with them. They bring them the heat, as opposed to Mercedes. I actually agree with you. I think Mercedes will win the constructors again. So they'd be last in your introductions to the first race. Mercedes would be the last team introduced, as they won the constructors championship in 2021. So George Russell will be the second to last driver introduced, which is hard to believe, but it'll be true. I'm excited for it. I get your point about Red Bull, and I think if anyone brings it to them, I think it's McLaren. I really worry about Ferrari. Ferrari was so far back a couple years ago, and last year worked their way back up the field. I love Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc is amazing. I love him. And I love Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz, by the way, here's a SAP stat. Most points, 521.5 in F1 history without a victory. Now, I also understand that the points have changed throughout the years. So it's relative, it's a handful of 15 years or whatever relevant number. But most points by a driver without a victory. That'll break. I shouldn't give away my predictions for next week, but he will win a race next year. He's too good to not have that happen. And I love, like I said, Charles Leclerc is just an amazing driver. But I think there was something to the fact that they cheated with the fuel flow a couple years ago and they got caught. I think there's something to that because it dropped off so fast, their production in the middle of the year was it 2019, just so fast. So I feel like McLaren's on the up. I feel like Red Bull's kind of on the up. Maybe McLaren catches them. I feel like Ferrari may drop a couple. I actually have them in my Alpine bucket where I worry. I don't think Ferrari will be third next year. I think it'll be fourth or lower. And so we'll see. But I do think Mercedes takes it home, I think, again. And I cannot wait. To see what George Russell can do in that car full time. I am probably the most excited about anything is, I can't wait to see what Alfa Romeo does, what Valtteri can do and lead that team and how far up they go from there, and what George can do in the second banana chair to Lewis. I just want to see it happen. Just Bahrain 2020, Sakia, the short when George took Lewis's spot when he had COVID, was so much fun to watch. Yeah. And it was another race for people who are new. Go watch that one. It was chaos. The Mercedes pit stop, I won't give it away. Just wait for it to happen. And then you'll go, what? I mean, I have a GIF. Yes. And I say GIF. Sorry, people. You may think it's GIF. You're wrong. And of George just collapsing after the race and holding his head. And I send it to anyone when anything crazy happens. So I can't wait. I hear you, Rob. I actually like your idea about people attacking Red Bull, but you're wrong on the way it's going to happen. Ferrari's going to drop. McLaren's on the rise. Mercedes will win.
Well, so you've said I'm wrong and then proceeded to agree with everything that I said,
except for the Ferrari point. I
didn't give an order for Ferrari and McLaren. Come on, wash your ears out. I said that McLaren and Ferrari will have raised it enough to be challenging Red Bull. Now, I agree with you. McLaren might swap places and be the third team at the end of the shakeout, but I think McLaren and Ferrari will be competitive enough with Red Bull to distract them that I just see it being more of a procession for Mercedes. But just so that we don't upset anybody, because we were kind of going through each team driver by driver. So we mentioned Ferrari. I mean, Ferrari and Red Bull have just retained the same. We've got Leclerc and Sainz, like you just said, love them both. Red Bull have kept Max and Sergio. Why wouldn't you? Max is he's the new world champion. His star is only on the rise. And Sergio, who I had to check this twice, he's 31. I didn't realize he was that old, right? But he's been an amazing teammate. So why wouldn't you keep those two together? So they're obviously going to be wanting to go for both Drivers' Championship and Constructors. Just something in my gut says it's not going to happen. I just think they're going to get some more competition from the pack this year. Maybe it's just pure optimism that I want it to be a closer set of races next year. I want more than just two teams fighting for the win each week. So maybe it is just kind of misguided optimism, but I'd like to see McLaren and Ferrari. and maybe even some of the other guys like we were talking about. If we can get Alpha, Williams, any of those guys knocking on the door as well, I just think closer racing is good for everybody. My gut just says as close as it might get throughout any of the field members, I just still feel the Mercedes are gonna just be too good for everybody again.
I would say though, you said we both have a soft spot for Ferrari, and you mentioned Charles. You actually sound a lot like Charles.
I am stupid.
So I'll leave that for you, because you said I'm wrong. You're wrong. You can't handle the truth. That was the worst impression I've ever done.
I'm gonna just make a little note here that we need to take your soundboard off you. You're now banned from using clips.
I don't think so. I think all it is that
You will not have the drink.
I just need to have Kimmy's drink.
Hey,
and by the way,
thing. You're just jealous that I'm sitting here sipping a beer and you're still not got one. So,
well, Max wants me to.
Did you hydrate during the race?
I did not hydrate, Max. I'm working on it, my friend. I'm sorry. It's going to be a great 2022. And so, Rob, why don't you highlight a little bit of what people can expect in our pod next week? We hit a little bit about the driver, predictions we'll give. We talked a little bit about the car changes and and again, non-technically. So for those of you who are new or big fans, but don't want to get into the weeds, listen in. We have some ideas on what to expect, but there's a third part that we've hinted at. So why don't you tell everyone what to expect and start bringing us home on this week's pod?
Well, we're a little bit fluid on this one because this is our third episode. And we can't quite believe it, but our fourth episode might well be our first guest interview. A guy that's had a long career in Formula One will hopefully be able to give us lots of insights about what happens in the pit lane, what happens in kind of behind the scenes on the build up to races, on race weekend, probably the after race parties, and just kind of life in the pit lane. So ridiculously excited. We've just got to try to compare diaries and make sure it can happen next week. Depends on how long that interview goes on for. Who knows? That might be all next week's episode is. It might just be the interview. It will depend how it goes. Or it might well be that we can't make diaries work and it's new cars, new regulations and predictions for 2022. So it's up in the air at the moment, but it's going to happen. It's either going to be next week or it's going to be the week after. And I'm so ridiculously excited to do this because, like I say, we're 3 episodes in and we might already be interviewing somebody that actually does this like properly, not just messes around like me and you just talking about it. So, fingers crossed. I'm going to be reaching out to him this week to kind of sort out what we are allowed to ask him, what he's not going to answer. Then we'll just push whatever he says he's not going to answer. We'll just push a little bit harder to see if we can get him to answer it. But yeah, look, I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's going to be awesome. And other than that, really, it's any kind of final thoughts from you before we kind of wrap this one up?
No, I would just start getting towards the end and saying, thanks everyone for listening. I would highlight again, please, when we do, or if we can have our guests shoot us questions and comments. We want to make this as interactive as the podcast can be. That's not live. And by the way, just for a live podcast is called radio. But anyway, so I would say, send us notes through our socials, whether it's on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Our Twitter, which is easy to interact with, is at F1 Dirty Side. Same for our Instagram and FB, which Rob will mention. I would just close my closing thoughts before I let you say goodbye to everybody are these. We hit it at the top. What we're trying to create with Dirty Side is a very open community for people to participate and feel included. And so there's really no hate here anywhere. If we say a driver did a bad job, that's our opinion. We still have nothing but respect for them. So when we say we like somebody, doesn't mean we dislike anyone else. And for people who want to go to the stands and boo somebody, that's not really the way we do it. We want to go to the stands and cheer the drivers we like. And we want to be there to celebrate their wins. And, it's a little crazy out in the world right now with COVID and things like that. And our champion, Max Verstappen, actually called in. He said, Brian, I want you to share a note with everyone.
Don't forget to sanitize.
So don't forget to sanitize, be clean, be safe. Thanks, Max, for sharing that. Rob, close us out, my friend.
I'm so taking those sound effects off you. No, I think everything you said is spot on. So Yeah, we are going to be back next week. But what that actually means is, which I can't believe it because time flies, we're going to be back next year. So I think all that really is left to say is Happy New Year, everyone, and see you in 2022.
Everybody enjoy the drink. Take care. Be well. Be safe. See you in a week.